Hello, this is Jay Mitchell, and we are back with another episode of the Libertarian Uncensored podcast, going over all the posts on the Libertarian Uncensored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have, as something of a scientist myself, I found this to be a good watch, for posted by HarryCut9721, and that's a YouTube video from Reason TV. Eisenhower warned us about the scientific elite. And yeah, I would agree with that the scientific elite are have corrupted science to an immeasurable degree. Like a lot of people, progressives says, they say, oh, all institutions can be corrupted, but they never will ever question the institution that's called science, because science is just objective facts. Even though it's science, the scientific establishment has been proven to be as corruptible as just about any other institution. And you definitely saw that during the COVID pandemic, where they shield themselves from liability laws when it came to the vaccines. And yeah, so it just goes to show you how everyone will say, no one no that our institutions are a lot of progressives say our institutions are corrupt, but they'll never question the institution known as science, because the science is something that they think of as, like, it's like their god. It's just like, if science says it, it must be true. And that's just how also they shut down this debate. They say, well, the science says that X is correct, so there's no debate. I'm right. You're literally Hitler. And yeah, eventually, you just can't shut down all debate just because you think something's correct. Science, you should always be questioning stuff if it's correct or not. And that's not what modern science is. Modern science is just saying something and then pushing it as a fact, and you're not allowed to dissent from it at all, even if it might not. It might be something that a lot of people don't agree with. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Kamel Foster. How many people like Batya, who was recently on the podcast, were saying that this is the only way to decouple from China? We have to raise the tariffs, make it painful so that we can build up U.S. manufacturing. Instead, the Trump administration is actually breeding a retreat here. Posted by B. Hori, and that's cross-post from the We the Fifth subreddit. And yeah, personally, I don't care for tariffs. I do think they're well intentioned, and I do think the U.S. should build up its manufacturing and stop the how all cheap Chinese goods are pushed into the country. But ultimately, I think I'm against tariffs because they're a tax on imported goods. I personally think you should support local industry rather than Chinese industry. But the Chinese things they produce, even if they produce with government subsidies, which I'm against as well, even if people want to buy it, I don't think people should have an extra tax on buying something that even if it is cheaper. If people want to buy American, they should be able to buy American. If they want to buy Chinese, they should be able to buy Chinese. If they want to buy European, they should be able to buy European. I don't think that the U.S. government should be laying its finger on the scale to make one option more appealing than the other. If something's cheap and the U.S. wants to make it more expensive to encourage people to buy local, I think that's well intentioned. But the libertarian position is for a free market rather than a controlled market, and tariffs are definitely an example of a controlled market. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have the hidden trucking industry subsidy, True Cost, from CH Warlocks, and that's for a post from the TrueCostBlog.com. And yeah, as I said in the previous post, I'm against government subsidies. I know a lot of Chinese goods are so cheap because of government subsidies, but yeah, I'm against government subsidies. I think if people want to do trucking, they should be able to, but I don't think trucking should be subsidized by the government, just like with every other industry. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Michael Moynihan. Donald Trump decided that the government was going to institute price controls. Conservatives in the past didn't like the government setting prices. It's kind of in contravention to everything they believed in so-called conservative economics. And that's from B. Hori, and that's cross-post from the We the Fifth subreddit. And yeah, I would agree with that. Conservatives used to be more pro free market, but now increasingly they're for protectionist economics, just like the Democrats are. Increasingly Donald Trump economically he might as well be Bernie Sanders, even if Reddit would never agree with that because Bernie's in the in group and Donald Trump's in the out group. But increasingly Donald Trump is like Bernie Sanders when it comes to how much the government should be involved in the economy. The libertarian position is the government shouldn't be involved in the economy at all. Well, Donald Trump is increasingly pushing for more and more government intervention in the economy, and I don't think that's the libertarian option perspective. And that's my thought on that issue. Then we have Senator Maggie Hassan corrects DHS Secretary Kristi Noem after she claims habeas corpus gives the president the constitutional right to deport from Legio X, and that's across from the law subreddit. And ultimately, I personally don't really care for, this Senator Hassan, but she's right here. The Constitution, the habeas corpus does not give the president the constitutional right to deport. The Constitution would give that, and that's not in the Constitution. If the president wants to deport people, ultimately he should be able to justify whatever he wants to. But it's not something that's constitutional. The Constitution, no one really cares about it. They just want to use it as a means to an end to justify their authoritarianism. That's why, the Constitution has been walked all over for 200 years. So I personally think, the Constitution is kind of almost completely irrelevant, Well, it personally makes me think, well, why should I have to uphold the U.S. government if it has shown time and time again that it doesn't uphold its founding principles in the Constitution? That just goes to show you that if the government says this document gives us legitimacy but doesn't follow this document, then they are pretty much admitting that they are illegitimate, and that's how I feel very much about the state. The state is illegitimate because it says that it says, oh, we have all this stuff to keep us in check, but in reality, they can justify whatever they want to since they have a monopoly on force, even if it goes against the Constitution, which has been proven time and time again over the past 200 or so years. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Trump says big bill should only help GOP states, don't want to benefit Dem governors from rawstory.com, posted by Donald Key. And I personally don't think the bill should help every state, but if they just want to help some states rather than other states, that's on them. The government can justify spending its money however it wants to, and sometimes there's nothing you can do about it. That's why I think we got to separate our money from the government. But sadly, we live in a world where the government just gets more and more involved in money and pretty much everything every year, so I don't think that's all that realistic. Then we have Wonder Who You Voted For, posted by FlimsyOwl5563, and that's cross-post from the Don't You Know Who I Am subreddit, and that was Chase Oliver tweeting, MAGA is not limited government, MAGA is not fiscally responsible, MAGA is not conservative, MAGA is control, central planning, and authoritarianism. It's closer to Lenin than liberty. And that was him responding to a tweet from Thomas Massey, who tweeted, the big beautiful bill will add $20 trillion in federal debt over 10 years, and that's according to the authors of it. But there's another huge problem. It will increase the price of the $36 trillion of debt we already have as bond buyers realize we aren't fiscally responsible. And that was him sharing a headline, movies cuts Americans pristine credit rating, citing raising debt. Anyway, to the first tweet, James Dexter replied, just curious to ask, how do you view the Democrats? Why are they similar or different? Chase Oliver replied, do I think Democrats should support limited government response to fiscal responsibility? No, that's why I'm a libertarian, not a Democrat or Republican. And then Rigo Valens replied, I bet my life savings that you voted for Kamala, the commie bitch, a libertarian, haha. And then they share a logo of his presidential campaign. But I think that goes to show you how, a lot of people, they don't even know there are third parties. Chase Oliver ran a third party candidacy last year for the president, but, no one really paid attention to it, and he didn't do too hot. But yeah, I personally think he did probably vote for himself rather than Kamala. That's why I think he ran against Kamala in addition to Trump. But yeah, I do think that that does kind of prove a point that, third parties are just kind of often slept over. But, there definitely still is a place for third parties, I would say. They give people another option to vote for, If it were up to a lot of Republicans and Democrats, there would only be two options to vote for. And yeah, that's like Michael Malice says, the tyranny is having one option for dear leader, but democracy is having two options for dear leader. So it just goes to show you that, We need to we need to get rid of the two-party system. But I don't think that's too realistic either. But anyway, yeah, I definitely do agree with Chase Oliver's points here. I definitely I did vote for him last year. I definitely think he's a bit of on the woker side of the spectrum for my taste. But I do think I definitely would still do it again today because Trump, he's been showing he's just doing the same thing as a lot of the same thing as his first terms. He's coming in with gusto and getting a lot of media attention, but he's just pretty much doing a lot of stuff that Obama and Biden did. Although I do think the second term so far has been better than his first term, but that's not really saying too much, I would say, especially because his first term set the bar really low when he hired people like John Bolton. Regardless, I definitely don't think Kamala would have been better, so I'm glad I went with Chase. And yeah, I definitely don't think. Yeah, he would have voted for Kamala, and that's why they call it the "Don't You Know Who I Am" subreddit because he probably voted for himself rather than Kamala, but he might be he might be a Democrat by MAGA standards, but he's probably a Nazi by Reddit standards as well. So increasingly you're a Democrat or Republican even if you are a third party, and that just goes to show you how it's like we're in a prison and you're either forced to join the red gang or the blue gang. You can't just be independent or join or start your own gang. You have to join either the red or the blue gang, and people don't view politics outside of that paradigm these days. I think that's a big lesson from all this Twitter chain, and I would say. And yeah, that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Christine Oem's habeas corpus response to senators raises eyebrows from Newsweek.com, posted by CH4Locks. And yeah, I don't really care for it, but the government, habeas corpus is just kind of a fancy term that the government uses to say, oh, we respect your right to due process. Well, in reality, the government has never respected the right to due process. They have always been able to justify using force for whatever reasons they feel like, and that's my fault on that issue. Then we have Matt Welch, the sycophancy that has extra problems because it's Congress self-advocating for a very important constitutional role. It's given literally one person this magic pen and phone we've ever seen to reshape the global economy based on his whims and who he had breakfast with that morning from B. Art Hori, and that's crosswords from the We the Fifth subreddit. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for how much power is centralized in the presidency right now, but it's been centralized in the presidency since arguably Woodrow Wilson took over, so that's over 100 years now, and no one's really been interested in decentralizing power since then, maybe Calvin Coolidge, but that was about 100 years ago too, and that just goes to show you that, ultimately the president can justify doing what he's doing, and Congress has little, if any, actual power. I think they said that Trump's only signed 5 or 6 bills from Congress this year so far. It's 4 months into his term. So, it just goes to show you, that's why the president tends to lead by executive order rather than congressional bill. Because, the people generally view the power as being with the president rather than Congress. And yeah, the Constitution might say there's checks and balances, but ultimately power is whoever's in charge is willing to say it is. And that's my thought on that issue. Then we have Malay shuts down Argentina unit investigating crypto scandal from Bloomberg.com, posted by Knee Concussions. And yeah, Reddit is of course going to make everyone who dissents at all from the official DNC narrative look bad, unless the only exception is the people who are on the progressive side. Maybe they'll make them look good, like Bernie Sanders. He occasionally dissents from the official DNC narrative, but they still make him look good. But regardless, I personally don't really care for how he's shutting down the unit investigating his crypto scandal. But people are always going to try and protect themselves. And I still think Malay is pretty libertarian, but Reddit, of course, you're going to say he's Hitler because, Reddit thinks every libertarian's Hitler. They think anyone who dissents at all from the DNC narrative is Hitler, unless they're on the progressive side, in which case, that their only complaint against the official DNC narrative is it's not progressive enough. And yeah, I think we're going to wrap it up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.